I will announce one thing for my wife since she is gone. She is planning a Galentine's party of sorts for the women. I don't know, did she send out the flyer already? Okay, she's made a flyer, she'll send it out. But it's going to be February 17th from 10:30 to 12:30. That is February 17th, a Saturday, from 10:30 to 12:30. So women, if you're able, plan for that. It'll be hosted at the parsonage. She'll be hosting that. And Eddie and I, and maybe Robbie or Ed, will probably be gone for a conference then, because I didn't really want to be there for that. It is a Galentine's, so I'm probably not supposed to be there for that. Anyway, in our text that we have been dealing with, John chapter 13 through 17, if you remember, this whole block of text is Jesus sitting down with his disciples during the Last Supper. He does a whole lot of teaching. What he talks about here is pretty central. There's a whole lot of theology here. He builds on his theology, who he is, who God is. And it's interesting that in this text, John 13 through 17, there's talk about love, and then this talk about love leads up to talk about hate. Perhaps Jesus is intentional with this to highlight the contrast that should exist between the world and us. Right? The world hates, we love. And so today we're going to begin at the end of our text today, John chapter 16. John chapter 16, verses 1 through 4. This is the end of the passage that we're going to deal with. And Jesus, he explains why he tells them of the world's hatred. So he says, verses 1 through 4, I've said all these things to you to keep you from falling away. They'll put you out of the synagogues. Indeed, the hour is coming when whoever kills you will think he's offering service to God. And they will do these things because they have not known the Father nor me. But I have said these things to you that when their hour comes, you may remember that I told them to you. He tells them this, in short, to keep them from falling away. And if you're like me, when I read that, I'm a little bit confused as to how that's going to accomplish that. Jesus, you just told us that the world hates us and that there are going to be people who kill us. I imagine maybe in this moment, the disciples, they're a little bit uneasy. Right? It's not that people will seek to kill us, but you just said, Jesus, that they're going to kill us, thinking that they're offering service to God. And again, we got to keep in mind how this text obviously directly applies to them. We got to keep in mind how our situation is different from theirs. Maybe there are ways in which society and ways in which the world hates us. But as we know, we can just observe by and large it's nothing compared to what they went through. Right? The world hated them. And sure, maybe there are ways the world hates us today, but why did the world hate them? Why does the world hate us today? And before answering this question, in our text that we're dealing with, Jesus, he uses the phrase the world several times, and it seems that the world can be our general reference to the world as a whole, but it can also be specifically applying to the unbelieving Jews, because he focuses in on the unbelieving Jews in our text. So John chapter 15, starting verse 18, Jesus says, if the world hates you, know that it has hated me before it hated you. In this text, Jesus uses several if-then kind of statements. And one thing you're going to notice is that these if statements aren't hypothetical. When Jesus says, if the world hates you, he's really saying, yeah, you know that the world hates you. Consider their perspective. Consider how they've had to deal with these unbelieving Jews constantly trying to catch Jesus and them and to convict them. Right? That's hate. They know for a fact that the world does indeed hate them. We continue, verse 19. Jesus says, if you were of the world would love you as its own. But because you are not of the world, but I chose you out of the world, therefore the world hates you. What does it mean to be chosen out of the world? I think we can intuitively know what this means, but we can also look to other passages in Scripture to give us a hint, such as 1 John chapter 2. 1 John chapter 2, verses 15 through 17, it says, do not love the world or the things in the world. If anyone loves the world, the love of the Father is not in him. For all that is in the world, the desires of the flesh and the desires of the eyes and pride of life is not from the Father, but is of the world. And the world is passing away along with its desires, but whoever does the will of God abides forever. So we kind of get a pretty clear picture of what it means to be of the world. And so to be chosen out of the world means not to be that. Right? And so again, we read verse 19 in chapter 15. Verse 19, again, that verse says, if you were of the world being, hey, you're about the desires of the flesh. You're all about your possessions, right? If you were of the world would love you as its own. But because you are not of the world, but I chose you out of the world, therefore the world hates you. Right? And there we see the first reason why the world hates them, because Jesus chose them out of the world. He took them away from that way of life, the worldly way of living, the sinful way of living, the way that people are just concerned about sinful flesh, concerned about their stuff. He took them away from that kind of living. And I want you to think about how this passage here connects with others that we've read in John. So they hate them. The world hates them because they're chosen out of the world. Take a look at John chapter 3. I know I've referenced this text quite a bit. It's because it's very central to the whole Gospel of John. John chapter 3, verses 19 through 21. And this is the judgment. The light has come into the world, and people loved the darkness rather than the light because their works were evil. For everyone who does wicked things hates the light and does not come to the light lest his works should be exposed. But whoever does what is true comes to the light so that it may be clearly seen that his works have been carried out in God. And skip over to chapter 12, verse 36. Chapter 12, verse 36, Jesus says, while you have the light, believe in the light that you may become sons of light. When Jesus had said these things, he departed and hid himself from them. Do you see the connection there? The world, those dwelling in darkness, hate the light. Jesus has chosen them out of the world. Therefore, they're sons of what? The light. Right? So those who are dwelling in darkness, they hate the light. Thus, they hate those who are sons of light. As we talked about, being a son of light means that we are, in a way, emanating light like Jesus. We're shining light like Jesus. Thus, those who are in darkness hate us because we shine light like Jesus does. We continue chapter 15, verses 20 and 21. Jesus says, remember the word that I said to you. A servant is not greater than his master. If they persecuted me, they will also persecute you. If they kept my word, they will also keep yours. But all these things they will do to you on account of my name, because they do not know him who sent me. So as we just noted, the world hates them because Jesus chose them out of the world. They're not about the way of the world. They're not sinfully living, right? And they also hate them because it hates Jesus. They hate them because it hates Jesus. The world hates us because of whose we are. And you even see this depicted in Revelation. There's one thing I want us to keep in mind when we're talking about the hate of the world. Behind the hate of the world, if you receive hate from somebody in the world, behind that all is the deceiver, the devil, the serpent. In Revelation chapter 12, verses 7 through 12, then we'll skip down to verse 17. Don't get caught up in the imagery here. We're just trying to focus on the persecution, the hate of the devil. It says, now war arose in heaven. Michael and his angels fighting against the dragon, and the dragon and his angels fought back. But he was defeated, and there was no longer any place for them in heaven. And the great dragon was thrown down, that ancient serpent who is called the devil and Satan, the deceiver of the whole world. He was thrown down to the earth, and his angels were thrown down with him. We continue on, verse 10. Then the dragon became furious with the woman and went off to make war on the rest of her offspring and on those who keep the commandments of God and hold to the testimony of Jesus, and he stood on the sand of the sea. You see, in Revelation, what is depicted is that the devil, Satan, is behind the persecution. He's the driving factor of the hate that we receive from the world. And it's important to keep this in mind because when we're having issues with the world, when we receive that hate, we got to keep in mind that they're really not the core issue. Right? The people hating us, that's not at core what the issue is. behind the hate is the devil. And we got to keep in mind Ephesians chapter 6, verse 12, right? Our fight is not with flesh and blood, but with principalities and powers. It's a spiritual battle. Right? Often when we receive hate, our reaction is to take up arms. Quite literally. When we receive hate, often our response is to take up arms. But the thing is, according to Scripture, this is not a physical battle. This is not a physical battle. I think of, which I'm jumping ahead of myself, but I think of when they come to arrest Jesus, right? Peter slices off an ear, but that's not the plan. I think if we were all in that situation, we want to take up arms, defend ourselves. You want to kill me, I'm going to kill you first. You want to hate me, I'm going to hate you first. That's been the response of mankind for so long, and that's been the response of, if we're honest, of a lot of Christians for so long, is that in response to hate, in response to physical violence, we respond with physical violence. Maybe this is a byproduct of the culture we're in. We respond to force with force. We respond to violence with more violence. But that's not the answer. Back to John chapter 15, verse 21, Jesus continues. He says, "But all these things they will do to you on account of my name, because they do not know him who sent me." Jesus describes these haters a little more. They hate us because we are of Jesus, but they also hate us because they don't know the Father. They hate us because they don't know the Father. And it's easy to hate who you don't know. I mean, we know this. We can look through history, or even more recent history, with racial tensions that existed in our country. It's easy to hate who you don't know. People who are of different cultures, people who are of different races. We've seen this in history. People have hated them, have hated people who were different from them because they did not know them. Easy to hate who you do not know. And here's a question for you. How can people dwelling in the darkness, right, those people who hate the light, who hate children of light, how can they know if we do not shine light on them? Because sometimes our response to hate is to fight back with violence. Sometimes that's our response. But sometimes our response to the hate is to flee. When people might hate us for our faith, for the person we believe in, sometimes we flee. Again, it's easy for somebody to hate who they don't know, and how can they know if we do not shine light on them? As Jesus says in Matthew, "You are the light of the world. A city set on a hill," I don't have this in the slides, "a city set out on the hill cannot be hidden." Does anybody light a lamp and put it under a basket? But on a stand so that it gives light to all in the house. How can they know if we are not willing to shine light on them? Jesus gets more specific about why the world hates specifically him and his Father, verses 22 through 24. He says, "If I had not come and spoken to them, they would not have been guilty of sin, but now they have no excuse for their sin. Whoever hates me hates my Father also. If I had not done among them the works that no one else did, they would not be guilty of sin, but now they have seen and have hated both me and my Father." The world hates Jesus. The people of the world hates the Father because Jesus convicts it concerning sin. And I'm sure we've all been on the wrong side of this. Maybe there have been times where you were in fact wrong. Somebody called you out about it, and then in response, even though admitting that you're wrong, you're defensive. You fight back, you try to defend yourself even though you are wrong. It's interesting in these verses here that Jesus' wording, literally translated in verse 22, it would be, "they would not have sin." Now, obviously, Jesus is not saying that since I came down, otherwise they would not have sinned. That's not what he's saying. You got to interpret that verse based on the context. Verse 22 again says, If I had not come down and spoken to them, then they would not be guilty of sin, but now they have no excuse for their sin. Right? The implication is not, okay, Jesus came down, now they have sin. That's not what he's saying. Rather, now that he has come down, their sin has been exposed. Whereas before they didn't know better. Right? People walking in darkness, if they can't see where they're going, of course they don't know any better because they don't see. But now that Jesus has come down and the world is light, there's no excuse for their sin. Again, consider John chapter 12. Consider how this text compares and connects to others that we've read. John chapter 12, verses 31 and 32. We'll skip down to verse 35. Now is the judgment of this world. Now will the ruler of this world be cast out, and I, when I'm lifted up from the earth, will draw all people to myself. So Jesus said to them, the light is among you for a little while longer. Walk while you have the light, lest the darkness overtake you. The one who walks in darkness does not know where he is going. While you have the light, believe in the light, that you may become sons of the light. Since Jesus came down, since Jesus was crucified, there is now light in the world. If he didn't come down, think about this. If he didn't come down, what would the world be in? All of the world. Darkness. This morning with class, we talked about Cain and how he went to Nod, and Nod literally means wandering. Cain's been wandering. He doesn't know where he's going. His spiritual state is darkness. Right? Without Jesus as light, that's all of us. Without Jesus coming down, preaching, living, dying, being raised, that is the world. That is all of the world. We are just in darkness. We don't know where we're going. And yet, light is in the world. We are without excuse. So what have we seen in John chapter 15? Why does the world hate? Well, it hates us because we are not of the world. Jesus has chosen us out of the world. It hates because it hates Jesus. It hates us because of whose we are. It hates Jesus and it hates us because it does not know the Father. It's easy to hate who you do not know. It hates Jesus because Jesus convicts it concerning sin. And we continue with verse 25 back in chapter 15. Jesus says, but the word that is written in their law must be fulfilled. They hated me without a cause. Now, this is why I said that the world can be a general reference to the world, but then Jesus specifically focuses on the unbelieving Jews. I want you to think about the significance here because he pairs these unbelieving Jews with the world. Right? They have this mindset, they have this general mindset of a works-based kind of salvation. We're God's chosen people. We do what God requires of us, therefore we're saved. And yet Jesus here in this text, he pairs them with the world. You're no better than the world. You hate like the world. They hated him without cause, and Jesus is probably referring to Psalm 35:19 or Psalm 69, verse 4, about this prophecy of their hate without cause. And I want you to take a step back for a second here, considering this whole text, what we've been reading over, what we've been preaching over so far. Jesus talking with his disciples during this Last Supper. He's talked about a whole lot. Right? He said to them that one of them is going to betray him. He said that, hey, Peter, the person that has been leading this group for y'all, he's going to deny me. He promises a helper that's going to come to them. He talks about his love. He talks about how they should abide and bear fruit. And he talks about more about love, and now he talks about hate. He essentially just said that the world hates you, and there are people who are going to kill you. All right, so put yourself in the disciples' position here. I try to think about what would be going through their minds. Imagine the roller coaster of emotions. Or what are they supposed to do with that? What are they supposed to do with the information that the world hates them and that there are people who are going to kill them? How do they respond to the hate? How do we respond to hate? And this is one of those times where just saying Jesus is the right answer. You'll see what I mean, verses 26 and 27. But when the Helper comes, whom I will send to you from the Father, the Spirit of truth who proceeds from the Father, he will bear witness about me. And you also will bear witness because you have been with me from the beginning. Our response is that we testify about Jesus with the Spirit. which is saying Jesus is true. We testify for Jesus. We say Jesus died. Jesus came, He died, He rose, and He reigns. That's what it means to testify. And the word here is interesting. The Greek word for testify, to bear witness, is martyria, which comes from the word martyr. It's where we get our word martyr from. And so really, ultimately, what it means to testify. And the word itself is at core being willing to die for what you believe in. You see, the world hates, we love. The world hates Jesus, we testify for Jesus. That's how we respond to hate. That's how they responded to hate. That's the only effective way to respond to hate. If you haven't already, you can testify about Jesus as we stand and sing.